Welcome to episode 15 of Navigating NewSpace, a segment produced by the Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship Program. MIFP is an internship, mentorship, and networking program that seeks to help the next generation of spaceflight leaders in the area of commercial space, or NewSpace. My name is Shayna Hume, and I'm a 2018 Fellow of the program and alumni, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Nina Arcot to the program. Nina is a 2019 Fellow, and she just graduated in June with her bachelor's degree from Princeton, where she majored in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering and minored in Material Science. She was a Brooke Owens Fellow at Loft Orbital and an Isakowitz Fellow at Accion Systems. Starting this December, she'll be working at Northrop Grumman on a flight assurance team. Nina, thank you so much for taking the time to join today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to. How are you doing? How is life post-graduation?
Doing well. Graduated in June and then did a summer internship and then just kind of didn't really do much for a couple of months. I'll be starting a job in December, so looking forward to getting started with that. And in the meantime, just kind of trying to relax and just take advantage of the time that I have now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty unique time post-studies, pre-job, so definitely take advantage of that. So if you want to follow up a little, I know I gave the brief synopsis of your credentials, but I'd love to hear more about what part of space you consider yourself inside of. What's your field and what really got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'd say, one of my main interests within space is material science and trying to work on research about different materials that can help us get into space or do things better in space. And the way that I got into that, it was sort of, I was interested in space as a kid. And then throughout high school, I got really interested in physics and chemistry. I had a couple really awesome chemistry teachers, and material science seemed like a way that I would be able to sort of combine those two things and sort of just use some of that chemistry stuff to still contribute to aerospace. So yeah, I majored in mechanical and aerospace engineering and minored in material science as sort of a way to combine that. And most of the internships that I've done have been sort of at that intersection and just seeing where you can sort of do research, either developing materials or testing materials and finding new ways to do things that can sort of help us withstand the different hazards that you encounter in space.
I noticed that about all your jobs. They're all so exciting in that way. What materials can we make to accomplish goals that right now we can't? It's really awesome. When you talk about your early... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say something that I really enjoyed is that through different internships, I've been able to work on such different types of materials. So when I was at NASA, I was working on polymers, and then at Accion, I was working on some other more like silicon-based materials. And then through my senior thesis in school, it was focused on metals. So really just trying to learn about all the different things and how they have different applications within aerospace.
Yeah, I think to most outsiders, material science, especially in aerospace, where we use such, unique ones that are created or, synthesized for our purposes, it kind of seems like black magic to anyone on the outside, the whole process of it. I know until I learned a little bit about it, it did to me too. When did you first start learning about material science? And did you go into Princeton with that in mind?
Yeah, so I think I discovered that it existed probably in high school. I don't know exactly where I came across it, but I think I was looking at some of the different things that people study that then end up in aerospace. And I found that a lot of people who studied material science were ending up in aerospace. So I looked into it a little more, and I realized that it was kind of the perfect way to sort of combine chemistry and aerospace. And so I actually initially applied to Princeton thinking I would do chemical engineering. And there's sort of a material science track within their chemical engineering department. But when I was looking through the courses, I realized that, I was hoping to sort of do the material science stuff and thinking about maybe doing some aerospace courses on the side. And there just wasn't going to be time to do that with the way the curriculum worked out. Whereas with aerospace, I'd be able to still get a lot of the space stuff and then get the aspects of chemical engineering that I was actually interested in by doing the material science minor.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Would you definitely recommend for any listeners who are in college and trying to figure out how to move into space to maybe consider flipping around majors or minors based on the course loads?
Yeah, and what I always tell people is look at sort of the required courses for the department. A lot of times there will be sort of a core set of maybe 5 to 10 courses depending on the department, and everything else is electives. And when I was looking at it for the chemical engineering one, all of their core courses are really focused on chemical processing and what you would need at a chemical plant. And that wasn't anything that I was really interested in. Whereas with mechanical and aerospace, the core courses are things like structures or thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, stuff like that. And so really looking at the courses that you absolutely have to take, is that something that you'll actually enjoy? Whereas had I done the chemical engineering route, those core classes would have been probably pretty miserable for me if I wasn't really enjoying it. And only the electives would have been enjoyable. So looking at sort of what you absolutely have to do versus what you're able to choose.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Definitely something I wish I had known when I was going into college. It would have helped me to feel like I had a lot more freedom back then. That's very
Yeah, and
cool.
looking at how much flexibility that you're able to have, and that really varies school to school. I only know at Princeton, usually by the end of sophomore year, you're pretty much set in your department. But before that, you're able to sort of try out a couple of things here and there. So just seeing what options you have at your school.
Did you take that opportunity or did you go in knowing for sure you wanted to do space and you were going to find ways to learn about it?
Yeah, I think I was pretty set on doing something space related. It's something, I was really interested in it as a kid, sort of in elementary school and middle school. And it's something that went away a little bit, I'd say, in high school, just because it's not something that we really had many classes about. And I was just, busy trying to do everything else in school. Um, and so I remember when I was looking at colleges and I visited Princeton, I found out that they had a rocketry club there. And that was when I realized that I wanted to make sure that I was out of school where I at least had that option to choose to do space related classes or just space related projects outside of class as well.
Oh, that's really awesome. Things like that are super compelling. So you mentioned a few times that you were very passionate about space as a kid. And then, like a lot of us, when you're in your teens, there's not as many opportunities to get involved unless you really start looking for them. Do you have any really early space memories that you kind of look back to as first moments of wonder or excitement?
Um, I'm not sure exactly where it started. I know it was at some point in elementary school. I remember going out of my way to get books about space and the solar system from the library, and that was sort of the main thing that I would read when we had our reading time every day. Um, I also remember being at a sleepover in fourth grade, and at one point we all went outside, and I think that's the first time that I remember seeing the Big Dipper. Um, I grew up maybe 20 to 25 miles outside of New York City, so there's a lot of light pollution. So seeing stars is something that was kind of rare for me at that time. So that's one of the big things that I remember. And beyond that, um, I was lucky enough to grow up close to the Bueller Challenger and Science Center. And so there are these Challenger centers around the country that came up to honor the memory of the people who died in the Challenger disaster. And the one close to where I live had these summer camps that I would go to for a week each summer. So that was sort of the other main thing that I did when I was younger related to space.
That makes total sense. I can imagine that growing up near those kinds of venues would be really inspirational when you see them regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember they also had like a family science day every year, and every now and then they'd have some speakers who came. I remember, I think probably fourth or fifth grade, an astronaut, Barbara Morgan, came and they had an ice cream social, and it was just the coolest thing being able to meet an astronaut when I was that young. So.
That's awesome. Back then, astronauts were, most of the program, but today you're involved in MIFP and the commercial space sector. Were you aware that the world was changing and trending towards, this private industry when you went into college at the time, or was it something you learned along the way?
I think by the time I was starting college, I knew a lot more about commercial space. I know definitely when I was younger, and probably a lot of us had the same thinking where we thought if we wanted to do space, we'd have to work at NASA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I'd say probably some point in high school when SpaceX was starting to get really big and sort of seeing them in the news a lot, that's when I realized that, there's so much going on beyond NASA. And I think it wasn't until college when I realized just how many companies there are. I think a lot of times the only ones you really hear about are the big ones like SpaceX or Blue Origin, and even when you think about sort of the old space companies, the main ones you really know of are Lockheed and Northrop. There are so many others as well. And so I'd say it wasn't until college, and especially through programs like MIFP, that I was able to sort of learn about all those other companies and what they're working on, and just opportunities beyond what you just see in the news about space.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were both a Brooke Owens Fellow and part of the Matthew Isakowitz program. Which of those came first chronologically for you?
So for me, MIFP came first. So I actually applied to Brooke Owens as both a sophomore and a junior and wasn't selected. I didn't even make the first round of semifinalist round interviews. But junior year, I knew that MIFP was also something that I was eligible for. And so I applied, not thinking I would get in, but figured, may as well apply. And all these applications are also just a really good way to just sort of reflect on what you want to do in aerospace and just to learn about some of the different opportunities. So yeah, junior year, I applied and ended up getting picked for MIFP. And I initially wasn't planning to apply for Owens again after that. Since I was a senior, I wasn't sure if I would want to do an internship after graduating. But I think what really pushed me to apply was my internship through MIFP was at Accion Systems, and they have a really awesome Women of Accion group there, where we would have monthly dinners and just get to know each other better. And I really appreciated just being able to sort of connect with them and learn more about their experiences in the industry and just generally working in STEM. And so I realized that I just really appreciated having that community. And so I knew that Brooke Owens would be sort of another avenue to have a community like that as I'm starting my career, just because I realized that even though in school I had a really awesome sort of group of friends, I think my PSET group was five girls and one guy. And so it was just, having that really awesome group of people to work with, but that's something that's not really going to happen anytime soon working in industry. And so just sort of having that community there was something I really valued.
That's really remarkable. I have a few questions, if you don't mind, based on all of that. So Accion Space Systems, I think I just said it wrong for the second time. Double C's are just so hard. English is hard. Anyways, many people don't know about this company. It's not like SpaceX. It's not in the news every day for controversial and interesting reasons. Could you enlighten a little bit? Like, what is their mission? What is their primary goal?
Yeah, definitely. And I had no idea that Accion existed until I was in that fellow. And, one of my favorite things about MIFP was being able to learn about the existence of those companies. And I remember Steve called me to tell me that I had been matched with them. He said, "Oh, like, are you familiar with Accion?" I was like, "No, I have no idea who they are, what they do." But they're working on these small ion electrospray thrusters. So each one is about the size of a stamp. And the idea is that they're modular. And so you can have as many thrusters as you need on a satellite. So if you have like a CubeSat, then you can just have a few of those thrusters and that'll be enough. Whereas if you have a larger satellite, then you can have as many as you need to get the propulsion that you need in space. And so the idea is that you can have it on a satellite so that they can correct their orbit so that it lasts longer and continue to complete its mission, or trying to avoid orbital debris or collisions, and just generally having that added flexibility of propulsion in space. And so the company was founded in 2014. The two co-founders were grad students at MIT, and they were doing research on this electrospray propulsion. And Natalia, one of the co-founders, actually spoke at the Isakowitz Summit last year. She talked about why she ended up starting the company, and she said that she basically thought that the best way to get the technology developed and to have it start being used was to be the one to start the company. And so they're working on sort of doing the research needed to get the technology developed so that it has the performance that it needs, and then working on sort of just having it widely available to different customers.
Oh, that's incredible. Did they already have the kernel of the technology when they started the company?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the sort of core idea came out of their research in grad school, and
That's
so now it's focused
amazing.
on just changing whatever they need to do to improve it so that it can go to market.
That is so fantastic. And what did they bring you on the team for that summer to do? Can you
Yeah,
talk
and
about
so
that?
I get a little bit. So the reason that
Okay.
Steve matched me with them is that their main challenges that they've had have been related to microfluidics and material science, and just being able to make things that are that small, but
Yeah.
still have good performance. And so I was working on the R&D team. I was actually one of only 3 people at the company that was working on sort of the next generation of their thrusters. Um, and so basically they said, hey, we're trying out this new manufacturing process and we're running into some problems with performance. Let's see if we can fix it. And so it was just sort of trying out different things that they can try to use to get the manufacturing process have the performance and consistency that they need in their thrusters.
Oh, that is so cool. I had no idea what they did. There's so many small companies all over the place in commercial space now that it feels like a full-time job keeping up with them.
Definitely.
Yeah. So over the course of, that year being part of the fellowship, which included the internship and the summit, how do you feel like your perspective on commercial space changed?
Yeah, I think a big thing is what you were just saying is just learning more about what was out there, um, and just seeing all the different things that companies are working on, and also just the variety in companies in terms of size and culture and location, and whether they're more research focused or more focused on, trying to do software related things with the business side.
Mhm.
Um, I think the other thing was just realizing, especially how many small companies are out there, and what it's like working at a small company. It was my first time working at a startup. Um, and so just seeing what that was like and learning a little bit more as well about sort of the differences between startups. I know my manager at Accion was actually the MFP fellow who was there the year before, and then he stayed on full time. And he was telling me about how he had worked at a few other startups where the culture was super different from Accion. And so yeah, just more about the variety as well as just how, I don't know if it's necessarily common, but seeing that it is possible to sort of have that more like research focused route that then has a company spin out of it.
That is so cool. Yeah, R&D space companies are incredibly exciting, and I know that I really agree with what you just said. Those companies have an incredible kind of energy that I didn't really know was possible in space. It's what makes it so exciting for me. Awesome. So I have a whole bunch of other questions too. Commercial space, we've kind of gone over. After that, you went to Loft Orbital, right?
Yeah, so this summer I was a Brooke Owens Fellow, and I was initially supposed to be at Virgin Orbit, and then things kind of changed with the pandemic and everything. And so I ended up being at Loft Orbital, and they're also another small startup, a little bit bigger than Accion, and they are working on rideshare satellites. So the idea is a customer can just be focused on their payload and then sort of hand it over to Loft, and Loft handles all of the aspects of getting it into space. So integrating it into the satellite and then dealing with launch and then some of the operations as well. And what's cool is that on their satellites, they're able to have sort of a bunch of different payloads, and they're working on a way to have sort of I guess a standard standard module that they use where it can accommodate a wide variety of payloads. And what's cool about that is that they're able to then sort of buy a bunch of satellite buses in bulk far in advance before they even know what the payload is going to be on there. And that way, when someone comes to them and says, hey, I have this payload and I want to get into space, they already have a bus that's procured and just sort of sitting around waiting to be used. And so I was working on the mechanical engineering team there, sort of in maybe in a little bit of a similar way to Accion, where I was working on some of the stuff that's a little more focused on some of their future products. So I was looking into whether it'll make sense to start using 3D printing for some of their components and how they'd have to adapt some of their designs and just sort of the benefits and challenges associated with that, as well as looking at some of the risk analysis for different hazards that the satellite components will encounter in low Earth orbit.
That is awesome. And how much does your material science background come into play when you're working on small sats?
So it really depends on sort of what aspect of it. And I think, a lot of times with small sats, a lot of the materials are sort of already defined. I think with a lot of the sort of new material development, it's a little bit more focused on the rockets themselves. But specifically at Loft, my manager made sure to try to find projects that would be focused on that material science stuff. And so with the 3D printing project, that's definitely very heavily focused on material science and the different challenges that you get with different additive manufacturing processes and understanding what materials you're able to use in those different processes and how the properties change depending on how a component is manufactured. Just because with 3D printing, it goes through a lot of thermal stresses, and especially for metals, that can be a big challenge. And beyond that, with some of the understanding the different hazards in LEO, different types of materials will react in different ways. And so that's a big thing, just seeing what materials can actually survive in space. That's sort of a big problem. Just, you have all the issues like radiation and orbital debris, potential collisions, and it's a very harsh environment. So just making sure that it'll both survive and do what it needs to do.
If you could solve any one of those problems right now, today, if you just had the magic wand with the technology to do it, which one do you think is the most urgent to be fixed?
In terms of like material science specifically on satellites?
Honestly, you can stretch it as far as you want. I just got to thinking, space debris, all the radiation issues, of all the things that you know of, that you might put your hands on at some point in your career. Which one do you think is the most urgently deserving of attention?
Yeah, I would say space debris, just because it's something that I think we have the ability to do something about, and it's something that we just haven't really put much of a focus on. It's something where there are a lot of sort of theoretical things of how we can handle it, but very little is being done to actually go out and test it and do it. And so I think just having more missions where we have to try out those technologies in space, see what works, and just have a better way of fixing what's already up there and also reducing what is ending up there in the first place, just by requiring more satellites to deorbit. That's another place where Accion can come in, is helping those satellites have the ability to deorbit themselves when they're done.
So cool. And a great pitch for Accion in general. So let's circle back to you. You have graduated now. You've had a couple of different experiences across NewSpace. What comes next? You're going to be working at Northrop, but what technologies are you interested in, and where do you see your passions going in space?
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure. One of the things that's exciting about Northrop is that there's so many different things that I can potentially be working on. And so I'll be on the flight assurance team, which is also sort of a cool way to learn about a bunch of different aspects of aerospace and how they'll be impacted throughout different parts of spacecraft development. And so I'm hoping to sort of learn more about a bunch of different systems, see what some of the challenges in industry are, and try to get a better sense of sort of what I might want to focus on in the future. I think it's pretty likely that I'll eventually go to grad school. I'm just trying to see what I might want to focus on in my research, but I definitely could see myself being in sort of a more like research or R&D type of role in the future. And so just getting a little bit more hands-on research experience, seeing what some of the different challenges are that I could best try to address.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all very important goals, especially figuring out what problems are currently in the field as opposed to the ones that we might learn about in undergrad. Even if they're half a year behind, you want to get caught up on what's actually going on.
Yeah, definitely. And with different classes that you have in undergrad, it's a little hard to really be able to understand what's currently happening as opposed to what's been going on in the past that they've already been able to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to steer us to one of our last topics for today, and this is something that you and I have chatted about before, which is how to increase diversity in space and how to open up the access for space to others. You've been pretty involved in this in the past already, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I mentioned, I went to those summer camps at the Challenger Center, and then starting in high school, I volunteered there and just started to realize how much I enjoyed doing STEM outreach, and that's something that I was pretty heavily involved with through the Rocketry Club in college, and so just being able to go to different schools or have community launches, and it's hard for someone to see a rocket launch and not get excited, especially if they're able to push the button. And so, just being able to get people excited about it from a young age, I think was something that was really enjoyable.
Yeah, I bet. I think a lot of companies and fellowships even are working particularly hard to increase that access and get more people into the pipeline because, once you hit the space family, you're pretty much a part of it. We don't really let people go. We love them and we give them lots of opportunities, but it can be kind of hard to find out where an entrance is. Shout out to the Patty Grace Smith Fellowship, of course, for opening up even more opportunities this month. What are some concrete ways going forward that you think we can continue to increase access, doing more than is the status quo?
Yeah, and like you were saying, I think a big part of it is making sure people are aware that it's something that they can do. I think a lot of us have met people where, you mentioned that you work in aerospace and they're like, oh, rocket science, that's so cool. Like, you must be a genius. And there's sort of this notion that you have to be a quote unquote genius in order to be in aerospace. And that's not true at all. I think anyone who's excited about it would do a really awesome job contributing to the industry. And so I think a big part of it is sort of getting rid of that notion that it's something that people can't do. So yeah, just sort of letting people know that it's an option. And also a big thing is making sure people know that it's not just STEM. Like any industry, in order for it to be successful, it needs so much more than just the engineers who are working on things. And so I think a big part of it is letting people know that if they want to have a career in space, it's something that they can do. And like you're saying, all these fellowships that provide specific opportunities, and also lots of other companies have other internships that are focused on different initiatives, and just trying to get people involved sort of as early as possible is important.
Yeah, that's an incredible way to put it. Just making sure that people know that, whoever they are, whatever their passion is in space, there's a place for it. And they don't have to whip out an IQ test to gain entrance. If they want to be in space, then we definitely want them to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that starts super young, if there's someone who's 5 years old and says, oh, like, I want to go to space one day, not just, I think it's easy to sort of laugh that off and say, oh, their dreams will change. But, I think for a lot of us, it's something where we were interested in a young age, and either we were stubborn enough to stick with it, or there were people saying, yeah, that's a thing you can do, and go have fun.
Yeah. And, if you wake up and you're 40 or 50 one day and you decide, hey, I want to go to space, you live in a pretty good time that might actually happen if you put the work in. So there's really no boundaries that can't be challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a couple of people who were working on something and, later on decided, you know what, I want to pursue space instead. And they've been able to be really successful with that.
Oh, that's awesome. So I have one final question for you today. Some of the people listening right now on the little viewer tab that I can see are prospective applicants, and we are coming up on 48 hours from deadline. The deadline is this Friday, November 13th, for the Matthew Isakowitz Round 1 applications. Applications are obviously available through the website. I hope anyone who's applying knows that by now. But for all the people who are stressing over, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and looking up things on thesaurus.com, do you have any words of advice for finishing off the application and turning it in and taking a breath of relief?
Yeah, I think I wrote the bulk of my essays in the last 48 hours. Definitely would not be the first fellow to do that. Yeah, I'd say, they think it's cliche, but be yourself. The review team genuinely wants to get to know who you are as a person and why you're excited about commercial space. So, it doesn't need to be a super technical application like it would be for other internships. Another big thing that I've been telling people is, especially when you're in a bit of a time crunch, think about sort of the key ideas that you want to get across, and maybe take 15 minutes to just write down some bullet points of ideas that you absolutely want to make sure are included in your application. And that way, when you're scrambling to get everything written, you're able to sort of reflect back on that, and make sure that those ideas are coming into play in sort of one essay or another. And lastly, just enjoy the application process. I know it's definitely stressful and it's hard in the moment to view it as an enjoyable thing. But I know in hindsight, I really enjoyed being able to just reflect on why I wanted to be in commercial space and how far the industry has come and the role that I want to play in it. And a lot of the questions that we ask on the application they're a lot more fun to think about than problem sets or something like that.
For sure. This is an essay that's particularly formal. It's all about who you are, and for us to have a chance to get to know you. You couldn't have put it better. That's awesome. Well, fantastic. I hope that gives a little bit of advice to anyone listening live or to the recording of this. You still have time, assuming it's not November 13th, 2020 yet, and get writing. People do it in the last 2 days. Too many of us, unfortunately. So you have time, and we hope to see you as part of the fellowship this year. Nina, one final question. Why is space important? How do we justify this amazing thing that we all love?
Yeah, I think there's sort of a few things. One is that there are a lot of, I guess, direct impacts that space can have, especially with small sats, things like, weather prediction or GPS or imaging, trying to get climate data, things like that. Beyond that, though, I think it's something that just sort of inspires people. Like you were saying, it's hard for someone to not find space cool. I think even if they're not as excited as some of us are, it's something that it's still exciting to think about, and sort of being able to go out and do things that have never been done before and just be continuously innovating. I think is something that's pretty cool and can also be applied to other fields as well.
I couldn't agree more. Nina, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I appreciate it and all of your stories so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
For everyone else, like we've said, applications are due Friday. Our fellows in the comments are giving you a shout out. They submitted at the last moment. You can too. Like we talked about last week with astronaut Garrett Reisman, if you don't submit your application, you're not in the running to begin with. And that's the only surefire way to get rejected. So make sure to get that in. I appreciate you listening so much. It has been so much fun to run this series, Navigating NewSpace, leading up to the application process. And I can't wait to engage with more of you on social media. If you have any last-minute questions, reach out to the people who run the fellowship or the fellows via LinkedIn or other social medias. We would be glad to help as much as we can in these final days. Additionally, if you want to get more engaged with the fellowship, find us at Matt Fellowship on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook, and stay in touch with us for the next time around. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great day.